All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. As part of our product management leadership series, we're discussing how to successfully navigate an agile transformation by identifying and understanding 5 phases of the Agile Anti-Patterns Immaturity Model to avoid. My name is Joe Ghali, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's webinar. And I'm joined today by Mr. Dean Peters, who, like myself, is a principal consultant and trainer here at the 280 Group and is going to lead our conversation on how to successfully navigate an agile transformation. Now, before we begin, let's go over a few housekeeping items for this webinar. Our mission at 280 Group is to empower product professionals with the knowledge and tools to build products that matter. And what makes us different is, unlike other companies, we're focused on just the needs of product professionals. Whether you need help as an individual growing your knowledge and skills, or you're working on improving your team's effectiveness, we have the experience and services that will get you to the next level. Check us out at 280group.com. And I believe we're going to be pasting a URL in the chat window. Awesome sauce. Okay, after this webinar, continue to stay engaged with the product management community. Being an online community can help you feel connected, so you can join your peers by joining our LinkedIn leadership group. Use it as a forum to chat about best practices and tips. We'll chat the URL in the chat box shortly. Okay. All right. So at the 280 Group, we love interacting with you. During this webinar, we're going to encourage you to ask questions. You can use the Q&A box on the bottom of your screen to type in questions at any time. Well, we will most definitely leave time for Q&A at the end of the webinar. One of the most popular questions is, can I watch this webinar later? Absolutely. All attendees will receive a link to view the webinar recording after it has ended. Okay, so before I hand it over to Dean, let me just give you a sneak peek at the topics we will review during our webinar today. So we're going to start with why agile transformations fail. And we'll talk about the associated anti-patterns with those failed transformations. And we'll talk about what are those techniques that you can help influence as a product leader to help turn around those agile transformations going in the wrong direction, as well as talk about how you can map your transformation success. And again, we're going to leave time for you to ask us questions at the end of the webinar, but don't be shy along the way if there's something you see that you want us to answer for you during our webinar. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Dean. We're going to first start out with a poll. Our trusty facilitator, Michelle, will be doing it. Please take a minute and help us understand, where are you in your organization's agile journey?
And thanks for that handoff, Joe. And while they're handing off, I'll go through some of these choices just very quickly. I want to make sure we want to understand where you feel your organization's at. If you're dabbling, your organization's just doing Scrum, but, well, we do Scrum, but we don't do sprint planning, or we do Kanban, but we don't do retrospectives. Are you doing Agile, but not necessarily being Agile? So it's sort of Scrum by the numbers or out of the can Kanban. We'll be talking about this. Are you now at the point where you're digressing, you're bending the rules to the appropriate context? Have you all made Agile such muscle memory that now you can depart from it? And are you at that really fortunate but rare spot where you're at a point of positive disruption, where the Agile mindset and value set drives the organizational culture? So go ahead and fill out that survey. We'll talk about those results right before another poll we run midway through.
So Dean, it looks like we got some rule breakers. I love it.
All
got
right.
some risk takers on the call. I'm excited.
Excellent. I love it when we have some risk breakers there. What do you call it? Risk takers and rule breakers. And I definitely want to have a conversation about that. But first, I want to start with a story. And it's a story about instilling empowerment versus installing methods. It's a story about learning from failure as opposed to prescribing what success looks like. It's a story about industrial era factory worker thinking versus digital era intelligence worker thinking. It's a story about my maternal grandmother, Aspasia, and why she never learned how to play the piano. Now, Aspasia came over to the country with her father and her mother and the rest of the family, and they resided in Philadelphia in the early 20th century, and they were living in what was called a tenement. And in that tenement, there were similar families from the similar village. And at the ground level, the lobby level, there was actually this meeting place, like I said, a lobby, and then it had a piano in it. And Aspasia would walk by this piano often and maybe see some other people playing here. And at some point, she summoned the courage to ask her father to pay for lessons, but they were expensive at the time. They cost a whole 25 cents, which in today's dollars is about half a day's wages. Well, her father goes ahead and accedes to that, and she takes her first lesson. You know, it's Friday. She takes her first lesson. She's very excited about where the white keys are and how they differ from the black keys. She wants to learn about the what's sharp and what's flat. But right now, she's just learning how to go from A to G and back again. And of course, like every first-time piano or first-day piano student, she gets a practice assignment for a C major scale. And so, Friday she goes home and practices at night, and Saturday she practices her scale, and Sunday comes about, and as was the case at the time, that the families and their friends would get together in this lobby and have conversation and exchange food or drinks. And at some point during that meeting in that lobby place, Aspasia's father turns to her and says in that very old school, old world voice, "Aspasia, play the piano for the guests." Aspasia has a look of panic on her face, "But Papa, I only had one lesson." "Aspasia, play the piano. I paid 25 cents for your lessons." Well, we all know how that probably landed. And it's for that reason that Aspasia was never allowed to take another lesson again. And I tell this story to set the table, because when I hear stories from the product sphere or the world of Agile, people, Agilistas, I always hear similar stories about failed Agile transformations. That there was this same level of old world thinking. And while it's not understandable and it sounds really messed up in 2022, we need to understand that at the time, 100 years ago, in 1922, there was a lot of industrial era thinking here. Taylorism, I think, is the term for it. Now, we're going to get into that in just a little bit, but I feel like this story is why I say, great news, you're going to Agile, you're adopting Agile, when I hear someone tell me this. But then I always caution that with, yeah, but there's also bad news, dude. There's like 47% of Agile transformations fail. Now, I thought it might be helpful before we get into why these transformations fail and get into this conversation deeper here on how Aspasia not learning the piano is a lot like how we don't learn how to do Agile. I want to talk, sort of contrast that first by talking about the benefits of a successful Agile transformation. I've been part of a successful Agile transformation. And there I saw, like a lot of this handful of big names in the industry, like Accenture, McKinsey, Harvard Business Review and IBM, where they talk about the benefits of increased EBITDA growth, increased revenue, increased customer satisfaction, increased employee satisfaction, and reduction of time to market, the reduction of operational costs. And for leaders, such as ourselves and our CEOs, spending more time on strategy than mired in operational management here. So while the risks are big, so are the benefits. Or as I like to say, when Agile transformation is good, it's very good. But when Agile transformation is bad, it's very bad too. And some of the same voices talk about that. And it's interesting what they say, because they talk about a stuck in the mud cultural mindset like Forbes, or they talk about silos that sort of are anti-Agile throughout the organization, like Accenture talks about, or Scrum.org talks about no appreciation for discovery or experimentation, or Agile signatories like Jeff Sutherland talking about delayed decision-making because of a top-down Taylorism culture here. Now, we're going to talk about top-down Taylorism culture, but notice that nobody here blames the hammer. I read very few articles that blame like, well, you decided to go to this framework or use this methodology. They're always talking about a top-down Taylorism culture. And for those of you not familiar with that culture that came out of industrial era thinking, I've given you a table here to contrast the two. And I'll just point out a few of these value systems from left to right here. So for example, what I call a top-down culture versus an empowered workforce. Functional specialization. We'll talk about like, oh, well, my team is made up of, well, it's not really a team. It's just a group of people who share meetings because I got someone working on the back end and I got someone working the front end and I got someone and it's not really working as a team. Or you have this very highly prescriptive nature of the work. You have leaders who are seen as taskmasters instead of enablers and empowering people. And that all leads to outputs over outcomes, and it creates this culture of fear as opposed to psychological safety. So we're going to peel the onion on that. And just like I felt it was important to give you the contrast of when it's good, it's very good in terms of the benefits of transformation versus the bad, I thought I might paint a picture of healthy transformations through 3 maturity models that are passed around the Agile community that talk about what a healthy culture looks like. And I would be remiss not to start with Alistair Coburn's Shu-Ha-Ri Kokoro maturity model here. Alistair Coburn, as you might know, was one of the key signatories of the Agile Manifesto. He believes very deeply in the heart of Agile, getting back to what Agile truly means. And in this, he talks about a maturity model where a team goes through Shu-Ha-Ri and into Kokoro. He's taking ideas that started actually in a Japanese no theater and then moved their ways into the practice of Aikido, where a team moves from doing Agile to being Agile to being transformed. And they get to that Kokoro point where they delight in the radical simplicity and find a place where there's high collaboration, accountable delivery incrementally, a lot of reflection on how to do things better, and the courage to improve in the basis of psychological safety. Another popular model is a maturity model is the Dreyfus model here of skill acquisition. And this also maps out what a lot of healthy and mature and successful Agile transformations look like. And it's about going from novices doing the rules for this, just to learn how to do it, to, to make, and so, where they're doing the rules, yet as they get better and better at decision-making here, they find themselves being autonomous here. So it's that transition from doing the rules because there's low autonomy and poor decision-making, and then transcend all the way up into great decision-making with less, with less supervision and less rules. And then finally, I think another maturity model here actually comes from the book, the Agile Leadership Toolkit, Learning to Thrive in Self-Managing Teams by Peter Koenig. And he has the ownership maturity model for Agile here. And he takes these lessons and he elevates this to the team level. And I like this because Agile is a team sport. I've been parachuted into many organizations where they said, Dean, we know you're really good at product owner management. We need you to be a product owner here and help turn this team around. And I've been parachuted into some dysfunctional teams. And the first thing I notice is, first of all, again, it's a group of people who are sharing meetings. All right. It's a group of people, as I like to call zombie fried, practicing zombie-fried stand-ups here. The first sign I can tell of a team not actually being a team is when the stand-up goes something like this. All righty, Jennifer, go ahead. I'm working on CTV-5521 yesterday. Today I'm working on CCTV-5532, and I don't have any blockers. All right, Adrian, I'm working on CCTV-5577, and it just goes on. And then not only are they just blapping out numbers here and not speaking to value, they're reporting it as a status to the Scrum Master here, as opposed to the team self-organizing around how to frame the progress of the work they've committed to for that sprint. So, I like this model here because it talks about, first in organizations, teams learn how to collaborate. And then as they mature, the teams learn how to give more reliable forecasts and manage stakeholders and deliver what they promised here. And then you can see it moves up to quality. And then it moves up through scale. And you think about what I showed a few slides further earlier, where Jeff Sutherland talks about, this bottleneck of decision making because it's too top down. And it's this scaling maturity here at level 3 that a team now liberates their strategic thinkers and to go ahead and continue working on that path while the team takes on the accountability and the autonomy that comes with this. And then, of course, what's seen as impact, not just at the team level, not at just at a tribe or department level, but through the entirety of the organization and even to the customers. Now, with that, there are some perils on either side of this. So, for example, high teams with high autonomy but no accountability. Yep, usually that devolves into chaos here. And teams with high accountability, basically where there's a lot of top-down management and no autonomy, they feel like a captive, and usually your A players wind up churning out. And I think this is amplified in yet another model. It's a team model of healthy transformations around building team cultures here. And a great example of this is around Google's Project Aristotle, where they really zeroed in on understanding team effectiveness and identified psychological safety as the linchpin to team members having trust and being able to depend on each other's. Where management, those of us in product management and elsewhere are providing some idea on the roles and the goals to help the team lead themselves, where there's meaning in the work that is done and impact on the work that is delivered here. So when you hear psychological safety, don't think a lot of kumbaya and hand-holding. And if you get some eye rolls, you might want to share Amy Edmondson's matrix here, where she basically says psychological safety does not equal anything goes. It's actually about moving from a state of apathy or perhaps anxiety or comfort and into this learning zone here, where a team is low performing and has low safety, and then manages to get itself up there where they have high performing standards and a high amount of psychological safety here. Now, it's with these maturity models in mind and then it's in the context of these maturity models that makes me want to share today what I call the Agile Anti-Patterns Immaturity Model here. Now, it's not because I want to, I was talking to one expert in Agile. I was, bouncing this off some people, Dean, pretty negative here. And I was like, well, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, because it's just like retrospectives. If you have we all been, maybe you haven't, but I've been to this Agile retrospectives where it's like, oh, I think Sally did a great job. Oh, yeah, really, really. Well, I think Jennifer, you did a great job. And hey, Joe, I think you did. And everyone pats each other on the back and everyone walks away. So we know what the mature is, but really the most effective retrospectives are those blameless retrospectives where we say, we as a team aren't hitting our commitments. It's not Dean who isn't hitting, they're having that conversation. So how do I enable and how do I get us to see and have those retrospectives to find out where we're mired down? And that's why I think this anti-patterns model comes into place. Now, I've already talked about dabbling, we're doing Scrum butt. I've talked about doing, where we're doing Scrum by the numbers or out of the can Kanban here. So I don't think we necessarily hit that, but again, understand that healthy transformations don't just suddenly fail, they devolve. But now I want to get to hyper fundamentalism, because I was at a place early in my Agile career where I was up against a Scrum master who felt that the Scrum guide was the infallible word of Agile here, and quite literally did things like put blue tape on the floor to make sure we stood in the right place during stand-ups, and did have what I call an HR inducing episode when they freaked out because someone used up all the baby blue Post-its that were only supposed to be used for technical debt. So in other words, they lost the storyline here. It's not about delivering on great Agile. It's about delivering working software and working product. But there is an even worse devolve phase that we have to be concerned of, and that's what I call command and controlism here. It's where the team is overrun by hippos, highest paid person's opinion, rhinos, maybe someone from sales, a really high opportunity, or maybe you get that always pleasant, what I call seagull manager, who swoops in, makes a lot of noise, makes a mess everywhere, and maybe you're at the beach, steals your French fries, flies away, leaving you to clean up the mess. So it's basically the team is being dictated to. And when that happens, it's not long before people start pointing the finger. Well, it's because, man, we use dad instead of less or safe, or, oh, we don't like it because, the stand-ups are this way. Everyone's blaming it, and it gets worse because product teams it starts becoming an episode of the Hunger Games, where you're not helping each other out, but you're basically figuring out how to, take what funding that other product person has and get it applied to your project here. So it really, really gets a little crazy here. And so I want us to map this out, because it really, you're at a critical point somewhere in your Agile transformation. And I don't know where you're at. We're going to do a poll on that just in about a second here. But where's your trajectory at? Is it on an upward ascent? Is it evolving from, start to impact? Or has it derailed and it's going somewhere from dabbling into derailing here? And so with that, I think I'd like to take us to our second poll here. Do we have the results of the first poll we can talk about?
Yeah. I think
So, Michelle, I'd like to give out the oh, here we go. We got the results here. Can I share these things here? Are we able to see these results, or do I need to share this on here? You see what
so
I can do.
I can speak to it, Dean. So roughly 31% were in the digress, bend the rules.
Okay.
And then followed by dabbling at 25, actually dabbling and doing came in at 25%, and then disrupt at 13% and depart at 6%.
All right, excellent here. So it looks like we have a lot of people who find themselves, about half the respondents that I'm looking at were in dabbling and doing.
Yep.
All righty. And then we have quite a few who are bending the rules, 30%, which I like. I'm glad to hear that. So now that we know what the anti-patterns look like, how would you rank your organization's immaturity? And I've gone through, 4 of the 5 stages here. The last one I left for, dude, we're not failing, and that's fine. All right. If you feel like you're not descending into a failed transformation, that's cool too.
And we're on. Let's see how we're doing. So right away, it looks like a big majority. Wow, it's going all over the place. I really like the engagement from the group here on the call. So thank you for everyone who's filling out the poll. We got about half of the folks attending it that have completed it. In the lead is the doing. We're just going through the motions. That's the right now, that would be the majority.
That's not
followed
surprising.
by dictating. Unfortunately, as Dean calls it, the dark scrum, and then dabbling, which is we're doing a little bit here and there. Yeah, so I think that's where we are with 70% participation rate. That's where we are. The doing, we're going through the motions.
Well, the good news is that for those of you who are in the 19% of dabbling or the 41% of doing, there's still time, right? Because you notice that we don't start to say, we're still at that point where you can either go up or down. So that's for those of you who are on that lower percentile, we're going to go ahead and give you methods as well to get dug out of this. So let's move on here.
Yep. There's always room for improvement, right, Dean?
Absolutely. So how do we turn it around? It's about change management. It's about mapping the journey. It's about servant leadership here. And to visualize this, there's this wonderful diagram by the McKinsey people here, where they talk about organizations moving from machines. Remember Taylorism, where it's top-down bureaucratic silos being told exactly what to do with work assigned, evolving to where the organization sees itself as an organism. I mean, the cells in my fingers don't have to be told by the cells in my ear, what to do, right? So it's at a level of autonomy where the different appendages and the different parts of the organization know what to do. They have that autonomy to make things happen here, and that and as a result, though, the teams are able to take on the accountability of that ownership, but they own the how. while the organization helps them understand the who, why, and the what, especially those of us in product here. And it starts with intentional change management. Joe, right before you start here, because I'm going to hand this off to Joe, because this is an area of expertise and excitement for him. I remember one of my jobs I got there, I was brought in to be a platform product manager. I knew what I was supposed to be. I thought I knew what I was supposed to be doing. I thought how things were going. And day one, I kid you not, hey, welcome, Dean, go to the 4th floor. We're teaching everyone safe over the next 2 days. And then for the next, 6 months, we're going to be running these 2 PIs that we've already planned out ahead. I'll explain that in a few slides later, how that all turned out. But Joe, why don't we get into change management first? Because that was less intentional. That was install versus instill. And change management speaks to instill.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Dean said, this is a topic I am personally passionate about. And, when we talk about change management, if you notice Dean's slide just a minute ago, it was all about how leadership is involved, how leadership is ingrained. So when we talk about change management, there are really 2 ways to look at it. One, on the project level, because change management is like product management. It's an application of structured processes and tools leading the people side of change to achieve a specific outcome that you're trying to get to. But on an organizational level, it's a leadership competency for enabling change within an organization. It's a strategic capability designed to increase capacity and responsiveness at the same time. Now, when we talk about change management, the way I always explain it to a lot of organizations that are going through either an agile transformation or a product transformation, which we talk a lot about at 280, you have to understand you take a step back and understand the context. Like Dean said, he was new to an organization. Okay, well, the first tenet of change management, we're changing for a reason. Why? What's the consequence? What happens if we don't make this change? Right? Because what you want to do is you want to get your organization, you want to get the individuals in your organization personally vested behind this change. And in order to get to that change, as tenet 2 says, organizational change requires individual change. Specifically, and I think all of us can relate to this, if any of you have been on any kind of agile transformation, is you have to understand who has to do their job differently and how. This is probably one of the biggest hurdles organizations are challenged with is, when you're trying to go to an agile transformation, people don't really understand, well, what are your expectations of me moving forward? And then from there, it's understanding that all of us working together as a team, that's how we're going to achieve the outcomes we're trying to get to. Like Dean mentioned, the benefits behind agile transformation, speed to market, more effectiveness, better communication, all of those are going to get us to where we need to. Organization change management is all about a framework because you have to manage the people side of change. What can we do as an organization to support adoption and usage? And then from there, we apply change management to realize the benefits and the desired outcomes. So we talk about how we will drive that adoption. Now, from a change management process, there are 3 primary phases. And the one that a lot of organizations really skip over when going through an agile transformation is that prepared approach. Again, just like product management, you need a plan. What does success look like? Who has to do their jobs differently and how? And what will it take to achieve success? You've got to be able to spend the time in that prepare stage before you can actually begin to execute. Now, the big key here, and one that needs to be focused on a lot from a change management perspective, is how do you sustain it? What is your transition plan? What happens when leadership changes roles or when people leave the organization? So you need to be able to identify early on, what is that sustainment plan? Now, when we go to a people side of things, we implement and use something called ADKAR. Okay, like we mentioned before, Dean was a new employee. Does he understand why he's going to do safe? Okay, does he have the desire? At my previous organization, I kid you not, we were training a team and I got a feedback from a developer and he's like, I just got a meeting invite. I don't even know why I'm here. I already know all this. So that individual going into it had no desire before we were even able to give them the knowledge and the resources to execute the ability around Agile and even talk about that reinforcement. If you can't do A and D, it doesn't matter how shiny an object you have or how big a hammer you have from a product standpoint or Agile standpoint. If they don't have the right context or have that desire, it's futile. It's a futile attempt. So implementing ADKAR is something we definitely recommend when it comes to going through your Agile journey. And Dean, I think I'm going to hand it back to you, right?
All right, Joe, and
transformation.
Yep. I want to talk transformation. I want to pick up just where Joe left. And thank you so much for that, because, as Joe mentioned, just starting with learning and execution without consideration for a change strategy, the reason why, the outcome you're seeking. Well, you're pretty much taking a waterfall approach to an Agile transformation. And what I'm suggesting is, let's stop doing this. Let's stop taking your first day employee and everyone else and just saying, hey, if we just put them in training, and, the first part was just saying how great, and it didn't matter what framework it was. It could have been any framework. It could have been DAD. It could have been, LESS. It could have been, Scrum. It didn't matter. All right. The fact is that the game plan was they were going to take a waterfall approach. And with that, they took on all the risk, and we felt the pain of that risk at the end of about 6 months. I kid you not. And it took about a year after that to unwind things to a healthy point. Now, taking an Agile approach to Agile transformation, I know we're getting a little meta here, but think about it. If you're going through a learn and reflect, learn, execute, and reflect cycle here, you reduce the amount of risk you're dealing with, and you start increasing the learning. And in fact, what Joe was talking about earlier, you can do this incrementally here. You can start with just 2 teams. Experiment with just 2 teams here. Let's see what happens with 2 teams. What do we learn from this? And then once the 2 teams start figuring out how to collaborate and using the coning model here, we then say, all right, well, let's do this to 5 or 6 or 7 teams here. And let's get everyone to a state of output. And let's learn what it takes to get teams to a state of where they're doing better with delivery on their commitments. They're doing better with managing stakeholders, and they're doing better with both the accountability and autonomy here, to the point now you can say for an entire department or business group, let's now do this, but let's bake in all sorts of quality here. So how well are you doing in terms of mastery of everything that's done here? And with that, ascend to a point where now you can do it organization-wide and scale organization-wide. And this is why it's important here, because I've seen it firsthand. I was at a startup, and I remember, the CEO saying, very frustrated, y'all got to get me out of, working on the day-to-day here so I can get into AR. Well, of course, culturally, the way the things were built was, the case was they didn't want to get out of the day-to-day here. And as a result, the company couldn't scale. And again, that gets back to what Sutherland talked about and his 47, reason 47% of Agile transformations fail, and what some of these other experts are saying.
Hey, Dina, we got a really good question from the Q&A. Sure. And the question is, does this work if the software team is Agile and the hardware team is waterfall? We seem to struggle with integration points and milestones.
It's an interesting question here. I think, so do we feel like it's like, I would assume it's a healthy Agile, is what I'm hearing here. And then I think there are some methods on integrating both waterfall with Agile here. I think it's going to be a matter of figuring out where those touch points are. Yep. So in other words, you have an Agile team who's rapidly delivering here on the software promise here. And now you have a waterfall team here. And maybe you need to have conversations on, well, what can we do to work on cycles? They may not be able to do that because of lead times with channels. They may not be able to do that because of compliance here. So for the Agile team, who's more responsive to change, I might start challenging them to say, given where they're at right now, would make more sense as an Agile team to see how you can respond to the change in the conditions that this brings on how you organize as a team, how you organize on your delivery, how you organize on your prioritization to help assist that team move along here. Ultimately, there is a lot of movement these days in what we call it, Agile for hardware. It's emerging. It's a conversation that's been emerging over the past 4 or 5 years. But it's still at a point of infancy in its conversation here. So while that metaphysical reality is going on, how might the Agile team respond to the changes that brings, or the conditions that brings, given that they can respond to that change? And this is what
Yeah, even to add to that, Dean, real quick, I worked in a company where we did remote monitoring. It was IoT, where we both had a hardware and a software component. The big key here is consistent cadence of communication between the Scrum Master of the Agile team and the project manager of the hardware team. What are those consistent touch points where we identify risks, we identify dependencies? So having some regular cadence and understanding that, yes, hardware is definitely on a waterfall fixed timeline, but let's make sure that they understand where we are from a software standpoint. So it's really making sure that the two teams work together. There's another question here, Dean, and I'll let you continue, and I can even answer it, is what is the difference between an outcome and an output, and how are they different from deliverables? So if you think about a hierarchy, you have your North Star, your business outcome, what you want to achieve with your product. How you get there is through a change in human behavior. And that human behavior is the result of the output that you deliver. So the output enables the product outcomes, which then support and reinforce your business outcomes. So deliverables and outputs, they're synonymous with each other. You think in user stories and features, they work together. They work hand in hand to support those changes in the product outcomes and business outcomes. Let's continue on. We're going to come back to the question around the hardware and software development piece, but we will come back to that question. So Dean, go ahead and continue. Great questions, everyone.
Yep. Because so we've set the table now. Let's take an Agile approach to Agile transformation. So what's the next step here? Well, we just went through talking about patterns and behaviors, right? And Joe just mentioned that, patterns and behaviors. Again, even with the question about, well, the organization, on the hardware side that feels it's a metaphysical impossibility. So what are the progress signals versus the warning signals? Remember, Agile is about transparency, right? And it's and from that transparency, we get inspection. And from that inspection, we get adaptation here. So how do we make transparent? And how do we inspect? So what might the progress signals look like? What are some of the good things that are happening here? Run retrospectives, as we said earlier here, and see what those signals are. And at the same time, identify the anti-patterns, the behaviors you don't want, to understand what's dragging us down. Well, what's dragging us down is that we have an organizational disconnect here. Okay. What's dragging us down is we have, this situation over here. What's dragging us, so all these things could be dragging us down. And so once you understand what those are, we're in product here. Figure out which ones you need to address first. Which desired patterns do we want to reinforce? And are those the things we need to do, sooner than later? Which are those anti-patterns that we need to address quickly here? Okay, we can't figure out how these two groups talk to each other. These two teams talk to each other. We can't understand, the CEO keeps coming in and mandating at a team level, assigning work to individual programmers for the mobile app. What type of behaviors do we want to address, and de-address? Which type of, and what type, how do we get ourselves basically to a state of empowered teams with high value delivery over here in the upper right-hand corner versus teams with high dissatisfaction, both customers internally, with top-down assignments, and that urgently need to be mandated here. And depending on where you put these on the spectrum, you prioritize. And those things on the upper left-hand corner, those are the, for those of you in the world of doing but don't understand why, here's your chance to say, can we run an experiment on this particular practice or pattern rather than just assume that it works? And then on the lower right-hand corner, are there areas of dysfunction that with a little bit of coaching, we can push that into a desired behavior? And you map these out. And then you need to figure out, okay, we can't do it all at once. We can't eat the elephant whole. So let's go ahead and map as we move from doing to digressing to departing to delighting, disrupting here. And let's map out what items we need to transform against and which ones are the most urgent ones we need to move against here. And so, nothing surprising here, but it's about being intentional. All right. And even if you have to start the journey in the middle, it's about being intentional with the journey. And the key to success, again, is about aligning agile values to empowered teams. It's about helping ordinary people, as Marty Kagan likes to say in his book, Empowered, empowering ordinary people to do extraordinary things. To get a team that's down here in the lower left-hand corner, it's just absolute chaos. Nobody knows what to do. And that's all these things, there's low alignment, and low autonomy here, and everyone's miserable and everyone's churning out versus the product manager saying, hey, we need to cross the river, build a bridge, staying in the solution space, or, someone getting upset saying, well, they better be someone working on this, and getting to the point where we're saying, hey, we need to cross the river, surprise me with excellence in the solution here. And the way to do that, Agile Manifesto gives us 4 key values, which we can work from here. Individuals over interactions, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change versus following a plan. And it's about servant leadership here. And again, notice from all the way from the beginning to the end, this really is going to take intentional leadership. If you're failing at the ground level, you need to make sure you have that leadership buy-in. I was with an organization, 2 organizations, now I think about it, where there was no real buy-in at the top. They wouldn't go to any of the training. They wouldn't do any of the retrospectives. The only time, like, for example, only time one of them would walk around, at the end of each PI, at the end of a sprint would be to beat teams, weaponize, what would you call it, rice scores to beat teams down, and which is not, And another one, I remember turning to me, how do we get all the same teams to estimate the same so we have the velocities the same so we can figure out how to pay people? Again, leadership losing the message here and not understanding. So how do we, looking at this, and I think a good place to help management is to get them to understand this, what's demonstrated here in the Hersey-Blanchard situational leadership model. And to think about it, a situational leadership model. Well, Agile's about responding to change, and it's about the people instead of the processes. There, I think this is a great map, and it's a great map to help those who may be delegating and being disconnected, or those over prescribing, in these lower bottom quadrants here, and getting them to a point where they're actually selling and enabling, encouraging and enabling and explaining, and getting to that sweet spot of what I call optimal team empowerment. And there's a reason for it, because when Hersey-Blanchard did the scientific study, they also noticed how the teams responded to situational changes. And you'll notice you get the highest amount of change when the teams feel highly self-directed, where they're, through very supportive directive of behavior as opposed to directive behavior here.
So Dean, we're about to go into metrics, and there was a question in the chat about, how do you get leadership to support your agile transformation? What if you feel like it's more of a bottoms up approach? And I think the metrics, that's the proof in the pudding, right? It's what value, what outcome have we achieved from an organization by moving to an agile transfer, to an agile way of working. So let's go to that next slide and take a look.
I agree with that. And let's go to this slide and also bring in back to your conversation, your answer about outcomes over outputs here.
Yeah.
When you have to manage up, you need to speak the language. Just when I speak to the customer, I need to speak the language of their business, as a product person here. When they come to me in the solution space, I need to translate that into the problem space here. And here you need to translate the outcomes you're seeking in customer value, in innovation, in predictability, in process improvement, in quality, readiness, stability, and team autonomy. And you need to frequently visit these and make these transparent, open for inspection, and empower the people upstream with the data they need to make decisions. They're held accountable too. Why did you go down this route? Here's what the data is telling us from the team's progress. Why should we do this? Because we feel when we do this, we can spend more time in strategy versus in operations. We can get to market faster. We can realize more ARR. So again, you've got to give them data here. And so that's why metrics like this, and you'll notice I give, things like for productivity, I give cycle times and epic burn down. I'm not prescribing any of these, one of these here. I'm saying figure out what outcomes you want and then measure those outcomes using the right tool, whether it's customer value using quantitative measures such as adoption and churn, an MAU, versus qualitative like NPS and the Sean Ellis score. Talk about where you're going with your tiny acts of discovery, or talk about, one thing I like to track in dysfunctional organizations, executive escalations. When stories get jacked into a sprint there or something else comes flying in here, and just keep a little comment in there to understand where that is. Again,
Well,
measure for outcomes. Yeah.
Yeah, and this really helps to when we talk, we'll go back to the ADKAR model, Dean.
Yeah.
This is you're creating the desire. By sharing these metrics, you're incentivizing, you're kind of dangling the carrot in front of your executive team to say, hey, here's the benefit to you, the executive, why we need to be going down this transformation journey, and how it's impacted us positively from a product standpoint and from an effectiveness standpoint.
Yeah. Your manager's manager is not going to hear the 4 values of the Agile Manifesto, just in the same way that I see a lot of technical product managers try to manage upstream by going into the technical details. You need to speak to their language, and it's going to be measuring the outcomes here. And it's about product. We in product, it's on us also to bake in all this Agile goodness into everything we do. Evangelize the product position. Joe was talking about, we don't know why we're learning this thing. And at the same time, I've heard teams like, I don't know why we're building this thing. Surface the segments and the personas. All right. I mean, we've got the tools to do this. We know how to do this. And yet, how many places don't we do this? Communicate the roadmap. Another one of our principal consultant and trainers, Todd Blacquier, we worked together here. And I loved how he would, as a product manager, come to his product teams and at least once a month, go through the product position and the roadmap here and keep the team in, keep the vision and strategy rolling here. My area of passion, lead with experimentation and discovery. I love tiny acts of discovery. It is one of the best ways you can, when you have a charging hippo, the highest paid person's opinion, to say, great idea. Can we run a small experiment first and see if your hypothesis has legs? Usually, there are some dysfunctional cases where it doesn't work, but I've seen it work more cases than not. Shape your backlogs and continuous bets. Shape the work. Think, employ system thinking here. Just don't, throw crap at people random. Empower others in owning the how. Quit meddling in the how with your teams. And collaborate, communicate, collaborate, communicate, collaborate, communicate. All right. That is just so essential there. Again, leverage Agile values to execute on strategy here. All right. And I think that's what we got here. I think, do we go to questions, or we want to talk quick about?
Yeah, let's go to the next slide, Dean, real quick, and then we'll try to get some questions. So I have some great news for everybody that's attending this webinar. You're actually the first ones to hear about this. 280 Group is launching a new and improved Agile Product Management instructor-led course. We've updated this course to incorporate the latest thinking on how product professionals like yourself can support their Agile development team and how they can reap the benefits Agile teams can deliver. We use contemporary examples drawn from multiple industries, and we actually have our first class starting in September. And here's the best news. It's either going to be myself or Dean that's going to be teaching this class. So be ready. We're really excited for this opportunity to walk you guys through this, to educate us on educate you and share our stories around how you can apply the concepts of Agile in the product management framework.
All right. And I think we got one more poll, but I think we want to do Q&A for now, don't we?
Yeah, let's do the poll real quick, and then let's do the Q&A. We'll do the Q&A right after.
All right, here comes your poll. Did you find this webinar helpful, highly helpful, neutral, meh, somewhat helpful, not helpful. Meanwhile, I'm going to read some of these awesome questions.
Yeah. All right, so first, let's go to this one here, Dean. What do you do if teams are committed to start the Agile journey, but the leadership is resistant and refuse to let it be tried? So I think we start with applying some of those change management concepts, applying the why, right? Setting that context for them, sharing your results, building a plan, being transparent. I think that comes to mind when we talk about, how do you get leadership to buy into the Agile transformation?
Yeah, their livelihoods are at stake here, and it's a high risk for them to take these things on here. So, you really want to get to that point where you're able to share then and show. And I think part of that is, as you said, help, show that you've got a plan here, that it's not just about, holding hands and just taking on these values here. And it's not just about, hey, listen, some of these persons who are in leadership have probably been in situations where somebody tried to install Agile at some level here. So say, no, we have a game plan. We know it's a culture play here, and we want to move the culture forward here. And we're going to make our outcomes known. We're going to make them measurable. We're going to make them transparent. We're going to subject ourselves to frequent inspection here, and we're going to adapt together and show them where you need to transform it. And as we said earlier, maybe start with 2 teams saying, look, you don't buy into this. Give me 2 teams. Give me 6 weeks. See what happens there. Show progress. All right. Let me show you now progress with 5 teams. So again, it's that taking that Agile approach to the Agile transformation and getting buy-in as discovery and risk are explored there. So that's how my thoughts on how I'd approach that.
Yep. So we got another question here. Any suggestions on how to be responsive when the team has siloed skill sets, embedded OS?
That I've run into that. And I think product owners really need to partner with their scrum masters here. They possibly need to have conversations with the engineering management on this, because what I understand that. And sometimes it's coming from top down, where engineering managers are saying, no, this is what this person does. But I think the product owner and scrum master can work together. And I think the product owner and perhaps the lead engineer, or the engineer who has the most experience and influence on the team, can work together in a way where they go ahead and figure out how to set up the work so you can cross-pollinate. I ran into this situation a couple times. So, hey, we want to let, Avanish work with database. He hasn't worked with it a lot. We know the story is going to take longer, right? Normally the team will, let's say their average story size is 3. They know it's going to be an 8 because Avanish is doing this for the first time. But you're doing this with the intent of some learning going on in cross-pollination. This way, Karthik can take a vacation. So it's about, again, doing things intentionally and not eating the elephant whole, but just sort of identifying. So hopefully that helps answer that question here.
Yeah, and there's another question here, and I know we mentioned them briefly. Any proven tips to optimize, avoid the failures in an Agile transformation? And I almost say it's good to fail fast. We talk about leveraging your retrospectives, making sure that we have open and honest dialogue, with the team, inviting the product manager to those retrospectives, getting their perspective. Anything you would add on that particular question and from our Q&A, Dean?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you and I had this conversation earlier today. Why don't product teams have their own retrospectives? They don't. And so if you've got bad behaviors between product teams, that's not going to happen. But yeah, it's amazing how dysfunctional I've seen some retrospectives at a team level as well as an organization level. One thing I like about Scrum at Scale is not only does it have Scrum of Scrum, it has retrospective of retrospectives. So it's about that transparency, that inspection and adaptation, and working. Hey, as I showed you, that risk curve is in that slide earlier, working Agile. You're going to make mistakes, but think of how much easier it is to go to your boss saying, it was a mistake, but we limited the blast radius because we were working in tiny increments.
Yeah.
The blast radius is much smaller when you're saying, just give me 2 teams, and the risk then is much smaller. So limit the blast radius in terms of your learning and failure.
So one of the questions here, I think this is related to change management. So regarding ADCAR, We try to make everyone aware, but there are people on teams and leadership that either don't want to change or speak to it, but don't believe it. So what are some strategies? So number one, when we talk about change management, there's a team perspective or team level and an organizational level, and there's ways of benchmarking it. And then when you're doing that, you're kind of like what we do at 280 Group with product management benchmarking. We do constant measurement. And so we go in, we evaluate different teams, we look at their behaviors. The key here is you got to lead with metrics, because metrics tell the story. It's not opinion like, hey, Dean's team isn't doing this. I don't think they believe in the change management or the agile transformation. That's opinion. That's emotion. What you want to do is you want to identify what are those behaviors that those teams should be exhibiting. What are those metrics that you can measure that say, well, we're trying to implement an agile transformation, but we're not seeing these behaviors. We're not seeing these outcomes from a change management perspective. That's a very easy way to kind of highlight where there are bumps in the road in terms of accepting or adopting agile ways of working. Great question, Vic.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I got here is, and it was sent to us earlier, Dean, is, how long does it take to see impact in an agile transformation?
I hate to say it depends, but I really do feel like one of the reasons I gave us the immaturity model is to say, like, hey, let's take a look and see where we're at. It could be, like we took the survey. Most people feel like they're stuck at somewhere between dabbling and doing. That's actually good news, because that's right before you fall off those big cliffs, right? So it might take shorter to transform because you're out in front of the problem sooner. However, as you've devolved into the phases, remember, each phase is a breeding ground. And the deeper the breeding ground, the broader the amount of anti-patterns you invite into the organization here. That's one of the key parts of the immaturity model is each of these stages down opens your organization up more and more to anti-patterns and behaviors you don't want.
Yep.
So depending on how deep you're in and how many behaviors you have to untangle is going to determine how quickly you dig yourself out.
All right, so one last question and then we'll get to our last slide. So this is a follow-up on the question we had earlier, and it's, the company approach is hardware development doesn't fit with an agile model. This is driving separation. So let me start off by answering, sometimes we just have to explain what's in it for them. When you're working on a physical product that has a software component, like I did when I was I worked for a power generation company and we did remote monitoring on backup generators. The key here is I think there's a lot of misunderstanding or not being aware of, okay, what is the value of working together? What does agile mean? So I think it's making sure that there's empathy for both the hardware piece, what does it mean? What are their pain points? What are their struggles? But also having understanding of the agile piece. A lot of times where I see the separation is everyone's making their own assumptions about what does it mean or what is their way of working. So the more collaboration, the more times you guys can have frequent dialogue, be transparent, invite the project manager to your daily stand-up, invite the project manager to your sprint review, and vice versa. Have the project manager bring members of your delivery team to their status meetings so they can have a better understanding of their ways of working. Because ultimately, if you can create that empathy, it will start to build up or build back those bridges between the two teams.
I like that, Joe, especially in the what's in it for them aspect of it. Would you like to have smaller, less expensive failures? Would you like, I get it. There's some lead times they just cannot avoid due to the physical realities here. But you got large companies now, so look for success stories like NASA, like SpaceX. Look for some examples of companies that are building hard products like Legos who are succeeding with this, and show them some of the benefits. So even if you can't get them to buy in, you can at least get the alignment. But I like what you said, Joe. Find out what's at the root cause of what it is that's causing this friction here. And this is where I would enlist various management help and saying, look, we're sort of butting heads here. And this is going to create delays here among the two of us. There's some operational friction we need to address.
Yeah, so let's get to that last slide real quick. We got one more link we want to put in. Just in terms, so we do have an offer. So for anyone that attended the class, Go to the next slide, Dean. Anyone that attended the class live online or in person, anyone that attended our webinar today, we're going to offer you 20% off all of our classes, whether they're live online or in person. So Michelle, our wonderful and amazing marketing person, is putting that information in our chat window. So if you want to see more of Dean and I or our wonderful peers at the 280 group, please check us out. We got a lot of great content. We love doing webinars like this. And gosh, thank you guys so much for the great questions and the participation in our event today.
This has been awesome, and thank you, Joe, and I'm sure thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone here for the great comments and questions here. Really appreciate you letting us share our desire to have you work great in product, the great product cultures in great agile environments.
Thank you, everyone.